Welcome to Columbus City Council, and thank you for coming down for this important conversation. We're here to get feedback on a piece of legislation regarding animal tethering. This issue was originally brought to Council's attention by my friend Luke Westerman. He explained that while Columbus had code provisions that address animal cruelty, harmful forms of tethering can still negatively impact the safety of our animals and our neighborhoods. In consultation with the City Attorney's Office, we've drafted legislation to address humane tethering in the City of Columbus. It has been an honor to work with so many as we have made it to this point, but it's certainly my honor to turn this hearing over to my colleague, Councilmember Stinziano, who himself and his staff have really been a good partner in working with the community to bring this legislation forward. With that, Councilmember Stinziano.
Thank you, Councilmember Hardin, and thank you all for taking the time to be here as we discuss this piece of legislation. As Councilmember Hardin mentioned, I too want to thank Luke for sitting down and having this additional conversation. At the State House, we talked about some legislation. We've talked about it at the city level as well, and so I think both Councilmember Hardin and I are very happy where we are with the process and this next step. Also want to thank everyone that took the time to be here and those that were going to be invited to speak and those that may want to speak. For the agenda, we're going to hear from John Oswalt, Senior Legislative Advisor from the City Council's Legislative Research Office. For those that don't know Mr. Oswalt, he has been working very hard in drafting the ordinance, so he will provide the review and also discuss any issues that may come up in form of questions. From the City Attorney's Office, although she won't be presenting, we have Sandra Martin here as well in terms of any questions on enforcement or any other city code questions. Once John has finished, then we will hear from Rachel Finney, Executive Director of the Capital Area Humane Society. I do keep noting that it will be Columbus Humane this September. Also want to note I saw Rachel working very hard for all of you this weekend. I was out and about, and everywhere I turned, she was there as well. So you have a wonderful Executive Director advancing and working hard for interest not only in our region but across the state. Corey Roscoe, with the Ohio Director of State Affairs from the United States Humane Society, and Lisa Morris of the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals will also present. Again, after their testimony is heard and some questions, the public is welcome to come forward and present. We will call names based on the order the speaker slips were received. If you have not had one and have an interest, they are the blue sheets of paper in between the doors and the entrance. We do want to stress that this ordinance will not outlaw tethering outright, but is an attempt to look for responsible regulations that will target those practices and manners that we know bring harm to animals. The research is overwhelming, and I know for so many advocates, what you see is very disturbing. And so this ordinance will address a lot of those concerns. And our goal continues to be make Columbus as safe as possible for all of our citizens and our pets. So with that in mind, I will turn it over to Mr. Oswalt, who's sitting behind me. So I'm going to swing back. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councilmember Stinziano, Councilmember Hardin. I'd also like to quickly acknowledge Aaron Beck with Mayor Ginther's office, who did some initial work on this proposal, as well as Shonda Martin with the City Attorney's Office helped out a lot. The proposed code change here is intended to address the tethering of animals in the City of Columbus. Now, how are we defining tethering? This is proposed code language that we're going to place under 232701. Tether means a rope, chain, cord, dog run, or pulley, or similar restraint other than a fence for holding an animal in place and allowing a radius in which it can move about. Also, as Councilmember Stinziano mentioned, this is not meant to be a blanket ban on tethering and does not include walking or training animals. And it does not mean how a dog is leashed while walking. The rationale for the anti-tethering provisions here are threefold. The first is to help prevent harm to dogs and other animals. The code change is meant to address the kind of tethering that for an animal can range from overly burdensome and painful to dangerously inhumane and life-threatening. Second is to lower risk from dangerous animals and reduce nuisances to the community. Multiple sources, including the Center for Disease Control and the ASPCA, note that chained dogs specifically are more likely to bite and attack humans than untethered dogs. They're also more likely to bark or make other noises, creating neighborhood nuisances. And then third is combating criminal activity that frequently involves tethering, specifically dog fighting. So on to the code change provisions. This is what we're looking to do. Have residents shall not allow an animal to be tethered outdoors under the following conditions. In an environment that violates the existing animal cruelty and confinement provisions of city code, such as causing pain and suffering to the animals and leaving them unfed and inadequately sheltered. This will reference specifically existing code sections referring to animal cruelty and animal confinement. The next is tethering outside on harsh weather conditions. This is excessive heat, cold, or severe weather warnings as deemed by the National Weather Service or other local applicable service. Also with a potentially harmful type of collar, such as a pinch, prong, or choke collar. And these are some examples of those. Using prongs or also prongs in a pinching motion once the restraint is pulled. Other provisions include using tethers unsuitable for the size and weight of the animal, like tow log or padlock chains. And these are a couple examples of these. The first showing a padlock chain being used, the second modified kind of tow chain that are obviously too large and heavy for the animals seen here. Also would be using tethers long enough to reach adjoining private or public property, creating a potential danger for other residents or other animals. Also using tethers that are entangled or can become entangled in a fence or other objects. And finally, leaving a dog tethered unattended outdoors between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., the nighttime hours during which the nuisance from animal noise can be most pronounced. For the enforcement and penalties here, Columbus Humane, formerly known as the Columbus Area Humane Society, under the Ohio Revised Code employs humane agents to enforce laws pertaining to animals in Franklin County and would provide principal enforcement for these tethering provisions. The penalties for these violations of the proposed code that involve cruelty, neglect, and confinement fall under the scope of 2327-15, 2327-19, and are classified as misdemeanors of the first and second degree, respectively. Violations of the remaining provisions would be classified as minor misdemeanors on the first offense, fourth degree on the second, and first degree on the third or any subsequent offense. These penalties are in line with the vast majority of other municipalities around Ohio and the state of Ohio animal cruelty and confinement statutes. Over the past decade, a lot of anti-tethering provisions have been gaining ground in municipalities and states. 22 other states have some regulation involving tethering dogs and or other animals. 18 municipalities in Ohio specifically reference tethering in their general offenses code involving animals, including Akron, Cincinnati, and Cleveland. The Ohio Revised Code, however, currently has no tethering provisions. HB 94, which would have provided comprehensive tethering regulations, was introduced, I believe, first in 2015, 2016, but was never considered. That concludes the presentation on these provisions. Thank you very much, council members.
Thank you, Mr. Oswalt. Councilmember Hardin and I truly do appreciate all the time and effort, feedback and questions and clarifications you've provided us to date. Councilmember Hardin, do you have any questions on the presentation?
Thank you, Councilmember Stinziano. Just wanted to, and again, thank you, Mr. Oswalt, for all your work over the last couple months, working with our offices and our community partners. Just wanted to ask or clarify around the penalty section. It starts off as a misdemeanor. Was there any consideration given to a warning in the statute, or can you talk about that piece of it?
Sure. Looked over the penalties listed by other ordinances and other municipalities and other states, the vast majority of which were listed as criminal offenses, and most of those began with minor misdemeanors. Anything involving more than that, up to cruelty and neglect, would increase the fine. There were a couple of examples that listed this as a civil offense, punishable only by fines, Cincinnati being the most notable of those of a major municipality. But by and large, this seems to be pretty uniform across the board.
Thank you, Councilman. Mr. Oswald, I apologize that you're behind me. I saw some questions previously about that 10 to 6 time period. Could you speak to why that's where the legislation currently lands?
Sure. Again, this is pretty consistent with most of the other municipalities and states that address the nuisance issue specifically with tethering. But it's the specific hours are something that we're still in draft form. We can consider the question in light of any other public comment or feedback from your office or the city attorney's office.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions from my colleague or myself, Rachel, if you wouldn't mind coming down. Welcome to Columbus City Hall.
Don't make too much of a noise with this. There we go. Good evening. I would like to start by thanking Columbus City Council, especially Councilmembers Hardin and Stinziano, and their staff for their leadership on this critical issue. You've seen the research and the public safety and nuisance concerns that tethered dogs generate. Life on a chain is a hazard and in direct conflict with the core values that I know our city holds dear. The enactment of this legislation will send a very clear message to our community that everyone deserves safety, health and high quality of life, people and animals alike. You may have noted that I'm listed on tonight's agenda as the Executive Director of Columbus Humane. While the name is new, the organization is absolutely not. The Capital Area Humane Society, founded in 1883, 134 years ago, is undergoing a name change this month to Columbus Humane. In the coming weeks, we will ask our community to share this news with a We Make Columbus Humane campaign. What momentous timing, as tonight you can help make Columbus humane. As the lead law enforcement agency investigating animal cruelty, abuse, neglect, and animal fighting, our humane agents are in the field 365 days a year protecting our community. Every single day, our agents encounter dogs who live their entire life on a chain, shackled to the ground, imprisoned in their own backyard. When responding to reports like these, our first approach, whenever possible, is to educate, to motivate, and to inspire owners to take the best care of their pets. We suggest alternative options, we provide supplies and equipment, even spay and neuter or other veterinary services as appropriate to help families take better care of the pets and comply with animal protection laws. Many owners are willing to make changes. They'll do it with encouragement and support. Sadly, many owners will not. When minimum standards of food, water, and shelter are provided and the animal is in satisfactory body condition, there's little we can do legally to protect this dog. Our agents must walk away knowing that the animal is in danger, even though a law isn't being broken. You see, our agents know that it's just a matter of time until the dog's chain is embedded into the skin around his neck, causing open wounds, infection, and more. Or the chain becomes tangled and leaves the dog unable to find shelter, reach her food, or even worse, slowly strangles her. I brought an example with me tonight. The chain that I hold right now bound a 45-pound dog. This was her collar. She had no more than a 4-foot radius to move when she was untangled. Her chain tangled, making it so that she could hardly move, and neighbors called us to get her help. This happens all the time, they said. But they didn't have to because the scars on her neck told her story. Our state laws simply don't go far enough to end suffering of dogs on chains in Columbus. It's important for you to know that anti-tethering legislation won't just help us bring comfort to individual pet dogs in our community. Dog fighting is prevalent in Columbus. I'll say it again, dog fighting is prevalent in Columbus. And dog fighters often keep 10 or more dogs in a single yard, each chained out to a house or a barrel. The ability to take action on behalf of tethered dogs will make housing dog fighting dogs extremely difficult to do in our city, especially in groups. Simply put, this law will help us put a stop to dog fighting, and our city needs this. Our Chief Humane Agent, Carrie Mannion, celebrated 35 years of service to animals this summer. He and his team are here tonight to show support for this needed change, and they are not alone. This room is filled with passionate citizens who care deeply about animals and the people in our city. They make Columbus humane, and I believe as city leaders, you have the obligation to do the same. Should this law go into effect, Columbus Humane stands at the ready to enforce it. Our agents will each be equipped with ample supply of safe nylon collars and other supplies to distribute to owners in the field. We're prepared to distribute supplies and information in neighborhoods with many tethered dogs in order to help people get in compliance with the new law. We will help our community be successful. Columbus Humane is ready, and we think Columbus is too. Thank you for being champions for all of the lives in our community, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Councilmember Hardin, any questions? Could you actually talk a little about the special relationship Columbus Humane has with the city of Columbus and our public safety forces?
Yeah, we work so closely. Columbus Humane works very closely with Columbus Police Department and also with City Health Department to make sure that our citizens are safe. We work very, very closely. We write each other into warrants to make sure that both the people and pets and homes are safe. We have actually had 4 years of generous city funding to help support the work of our cruelty investigations team. Even though we're a nonprofit organization, we have these law enforcement responsibilities. More than 92% of our funding comes from donations and fees for services, so the commitment that the City Council has made for our organization to be successful is truly appreciated.
And in your presentation, you also mentioned the willingness of Columbus Humane to educate neighbors and residents. Some of the feedback I've received on the proposed language was have a longer grace period, allow for the public to be a little more aware. Just curious your thoughts or reflections on, is more time needed? Will the agents be able to address that? No, we're at a critical emergency situation, or it could be an education component.
Every single case that we investigate, we start first with the opportunity to educate and inspire people to take great care. That's our first course of action. If an animal is in immediate need or danger, if it is a life-threatening situation and education simply is not an option in that circumstance, then we bypass. But if we can educate that owner, give them the information that they need, a lot of times people just don't know. We have to first educate them. Because even in a situation where you can remove an animal from a dangerous setup, the next animal they get is going to be treated the exact same way. If we can change their thinking, if we can motivate them, if they can develop a sense of empathy for the pet that they have, that is where we succeed. So we try that first. If we can offer them supplies or equipment that get them into compliance, we will do it, because that makes a quick, lasting impact for that animal and for that family. So will it take time for our neighbors to get in compliance? Certainly it will, but we're prepared to help, and I think our community is too.
Thank you, Director. Really, not so much a question, but thank you. I think you bringing down that chain in particular clearly illustrates what we're doing here today and the conversation that we're having. I think that so many folks, some folks may not see it every day or see the effects, but hearing from you specifically and hearing from the folks that you send out day in and day out that see some of the conditions that our furry families living with is really eye-opening. I have had a call or two and asking, is this really an issue in Columbus? And to hear you speak in those way, it really brings that home for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions from Councilmember Hardin, we appreciate your presentation and testimony. Next, I invite Ms. Corey Roscoe from the Humane Society of the United States to the podium.
Thank you. Good evening. And I too want to thank Councilmember Stinziano and Hardin for your leadership on this important issue. As the State Director for the Humane Society of the United States, on behalf of our organization and our members in Ohio, many of which are here with me tonight, I do offer my overwhelming support for this measure. Tethered dogs rarely receive sufficient care. They often suffer from sporadic feedings, overturned water bowls, inadequate veterinary care, lack of exercise, and exposure to extreme temperatures. As we watch the TV coverage of Hurricane Harvey, most of the people in my world are disturbed to see the images of dogs that have been chained up outside and left to compete with the floodwaters. Well, while we probably won't have a hurricane here in Columbus, we do get snow. And in cases of snow emergencies, my mind goes to those dogs who are potentially chained up and living in inclement weather conditions. And then when that does happen, neighbors will often call organizations like Columbus Humane to check on the dog. So then first responders are risking their lives to find out about the dog's life. Updating this section of the Columbus City Code will also help the community safe. We know that dogs who are socially isolated, who are continuously tethered, are more prone to aggression and more prone to be biters. The American Veterinary Medical Association also recognizes this harm of tethering, and they do warn, never tether or chain your dog because this could lead to aggressive behavior. Chained dogs are often a source of nuisance complaints, impacting the quality of life for many community residents and the law enforcement officers who are called to respond. This proposal updates the code will empower law enforcement officers, like those at Columbus Humane, to protect the animals and the people of our great city. These regulations demonstrate a forward-thinking community, and when passed, will bring Columbus in line with the other major cities in our state. Just recently, I read an article about the city of Delaware considering an anti-tethering measure, and right here in Franklin County, Blindon Township has already recently passed such a measure. I hope to see forward movement on this issue so that we truly can make Columbus a more humane city. We are very grateful for your consideration on this issue. Thank you.
Councilmember Hardin, do you have any questions? So Corey, want to thank you as well. Everywhere I went this weekend, you had petitions and saw you and how hard you're working. Curious, and I mentioned and alluded to some of the work at the state level. Where have you found kind of the impasse, why we're not able to have kind of a state regulation when it comes to tethering, and why it is that city by city, and you mentioned some of the other surrounding communities also taking an interest?
Well, I think in the previous session, House Bill 94, there was a lot of unanswered questions. Perhaps the piece of legislation was too prescriptive, and they had obvious concerns about enforcement. Taking it from city to city has afforded us opportunities to speak to all of the stakeholders involved, the community members, the law enforcement, city services, so that we know that if we pass legislation, that it can be enforced, because laws are only as good as their enforcement. Now, I'm hoping that once we get a critical mass at the city level, and we have proven models of enforcement that this is working, that nuisance complaints are down, bite complaints are down, we have happier, healthier dogs in our communities, then we could take another stab at the state level and try to see a statewide prohibition or restriction on tethering. So maybe an example of trickle up, but I'm hoping that cities like Columbus will be a model for how effective, appropriate, and meaningful these pieces of legislation can be, so we can compel our state leaders to follow suit.
For the city of Columbus and our neighborhoods, we like that trickle up kind of analogy. Also just curious in terms of our proposal and what we're looking for as the model for Columbus, how you feel that fits into best practices for the state, and if, we've mentioned, and Councilmember Hardin talked about some of the feedback we've received, delay or warnings. Curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I I think the legislation is appropriate. From the other tethering ordinances, restricted tethering ordinances I've seen, it seems to be consistent with, especially the city of Cincinnati, which is nearly as large as Columbus. They bifurcated the inclement weather and the tethering restrictions, but they ultimately passed both of them. So you have a little bit of both in your legislation. As far as the timing of when it will occur, I trust that under the leadership of Rachel Finney and her team over at Columbus Humane, that those obstacles will be met without much hassle.
Really appreciate you coming
Thank you.
down, answering some questions, your
Thank you
presentation.
again.
Thank you very much. And finally, I have Ms. Lisa Morris from the American Society for the Prevention and Cruelty to Animals to present. Welcome to City Council. Rumor has it it's been about 20 years since you may have presented last, but the paint and the walls look the same, so welcome back.
It seems familiar. Thank you, Councilmember Hardin, Councilmember Stinziano. Thank you very much for having this hearing. I'm Lisa Morris. I'm here on behalf of Vicki Diesner, who is the Midwest Legislative Director for the ASPCA, and unfortunately is traveling for business and unable to be here tonight. As you know, she's very interested in this proposed legislation, and you have her written testimony. I do not need to read that, but I just want to highlight a few things. And I first want to say it's nice to be back. 20-some years ago, I was here on behalf of Capital Area Humane Society, and it's really rewarding to see them going so well under Rachel and Carrie. First, for the ASPCA, it is the oldest humane society in the Americas, established in 1866, and it has about 100,000 members in the state of Ohio, and nationally about 2.5 million members. They have a very real interest in proposed legislation like this. I'm not going to repeat what you've heard about all the evils of tethering and the things that are wrong with it. You have very great experts here that can speak to that. But when you look at organizations, from animal welfare organizations to animal control to public health entities, no organizations speak on behalf of promoting tethering. Appropriate restrictions for tethering are really the standard, both for animals and for people. And I believe that this piece of proposed legislation, this proposed ordinance, will be a powerful tool, and that having known Kerry Mannion for not quite 35 of the years he's been with Capital Area, but Columbus Humane now, but for about 30 years as Chief Humane Agent, he will use this powerful tool well. And City of Columbus can be proud that they can set a standard. You have organizations such as the American Veterinary Medical Association and the American Society of Plastic Surgeons partnering on something like this because they have shared interest. They promote responsible dog ownership, and they point out that tethering of dogs contributes to aggressive behavior, and that, in their words, the standard is that you confine your dog in a fenced yard or in a run when it is not in the house. So it's interesting that there are many, many voices calling for responsible tethering and responsible ordinances like you are proposing here. We all know that dogs are highly social animals, they're pack animals, and that when they're deprived of socialization, bad things happen. It's not good for the animals, it's not good for people. The ASPCA appreciates very much the consideration of this proposed ordinance. Studies have shown, as you mentioned, Councilmember Stinziano, that tethered dogs are 3 times more likely to bite than non-tethered dogs. Some studies also indicate that those victims of biting or attacks, 70% of them are our children. This is a very real problem, not just for the dogs, but for the community. There is one thing that I would ask, and that is, you have talked about delayed implementation. I know it's not the standard in Columbus. I know a lot of communities have not done that, but it is my understanding from the ASPCA that one of the reasons that they are proffering some proposed amendments regarding delayed implementation and education, as Rachel mentioned they always do, is that particularly in low-income communities, when you first come out of the gate with a fine and a violation and don't have the ability to educate, that unfortunately many people, those people who want to do the right thing but may not know what it is, cannot afford that fine, and they will relinquish their dog. And that's not the purpose of this proposed ordinance. The purpose is to protect dogs and our citizens. And again, I want to thank you. I think this will be a powerful standard for the city of Columbus to set. And I think of Columbus as a model community in many respects, so this fits right in. And I think it would be very appropriate for our dogs that we do well by them and that we protect our citizens and particularly our children. Again, thank you very much for proposing this. Vicki will be back in town in a few days. She will be back to see you, I am sure. If you have any questions for her, please speak up. I'm happy to try to answer questions, but again, I'm here on her behalf.
I think I just joined with Councilmember Stinziano and just saying thank you on behalf of Vicki and everyone else who has been working for these pets for so long. And I appreciate your feedback as it pertains to the delayed enforcement. That's something that I certainly will look forward to hearing from community members about too. So I appreciate you and all your work you've been doing.
Thank you, and certainly we're not asking that anyone turn a blind eye toward cruelty. If it's cruel, that's something else, but if it's ignorance and it can be turned around, as Rachel said, it makes a lasting difference.
Just appreciate you and ASPCA's ongoing commitment and work with Councilmember Hardin and I, and the community as a whole, engagement on this and many other issues. So appreciate you taking the time and filling
It's nice
in
to be
for
back
Vicki's
here.
shoes. Yes.
Thank you.
I do want to remind the public, anyone that would like to provide public testimony, please fill out a speaker slip. Councilmember Hardin will take over the duties of the public speaker portion.
Thank you again, Councilmember Stinziano. At this time, we have 2 speaker slips filled out, and I certainly would echo Councilmember Stinziano. Please, you still have time to fill out a speaker slip. Certainly, again, I really am interested to hear more about the ask or the amendment to delay implementation. I think that is a piece to this legislation that I think may answer some issues that we've heard from folks calling in, but certainly the folks that show up in the room, I really value your opinion, so just appreciate you being here. First person that speaker slip that I have is for Mr. Luke Westerman, and again, I have to say thank you to Luke. Luke was the first person who I think met with both Stinziano and I and brought this issue to my attention for sure. Luke, would you please state your name, your address, and any organization that you represent?
Yep, my name is Luke Westerman. Address is 52 Victorian Gateway, and I'm representing our foundation, the Westerman Family Foundation. Good evening, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to first thank Council for your consideration of this important issue. In particular, Shannon Hardin and Michael Stinziano, for your stellar leadership and working with me and other leaders in the community for many months now in order to introduce this vital piece of legislation. You two are a blessing to the city of Columbus, and you're very much appreciated. And since my friends and colleagues have articulated so well their support for this measure, and I'm in agreement with them, I'll try to make my comments concise. We've all seen it. Those heartbreaking sights of dogs, thick chains tightly around their necks, almost strangling them, often embedded in them. No adequate shelter, water bowls always empty or not there at all, which is illegal. Entirely deprived of love, affection, or even the slightest bit of interaction or socialization. The light in their eyes, long gone. Their souls slowly and torturously stomped out until all that remains is a hollow, defeated shell. It's much, much worse than abuse, all because that poor soul drew the wrong owner, and because the community that owner lives in has chosen to turn a blind eye. And it's happening a lot more than a lot of folks think. In fact, it's happening right here in our communities. And as my friends and colleagues have said, animals are far from being the only victims here. In fact, according to the Center for Disease Control, tethered dogs are 3 times more likely to bite than non-tethered dogs, and incredibly 5.4 times more likely to bite children. We simply can't afford to ignore these facts. You see, dogs, like people, require not only food, shelter, and water, but also social interaction and mental and physical enrichment. And when they're deprived of these basic necessities, just like people, they often become mentally unstable, frustrated, anxious, and thus much more prone to aggression, which is precisely why many cities and towns across the country have already passed similar legislation, including progressive cities like San Francisco and Austin, as well as cities here in Ohio like Cincinnati, Dayton, and Cleveland. And Columbus absolutely needs to be next, and to encourage surrounding communities to follow suit. In closing, I firmly believe that if we want to be more compassionate, empathetic, and inclusive culture towards one another, we can't tolerate abuse, neglect, or mistreatment on any level. We can't care about people and their rights without also caring about animals and their rights, because it's all connected. So I thank you for your support of this legislation. We're excited for this to pass. Your community is appreciative. Thank you, and I'll take whatever questions that you may have.
Luke, again, I just want to say thank you to you for your advocacy. Like I said, you brought this to my attention, and as I said to Director Finney, a lot of us are not aware of the situations that some of our furry families are in, and it takes advocates, and then backed up by people who care to bring it to our attention. Since then, being out and talking to folks, you see the necessity for action. Certainly, following the lead of Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Dayton, it seems as if this is something that we definitely need to put our shoulder into. And so I appreciate you, again, your advocacy, your engagement with the community, you bringing the partners together. What is your take on the delayed implementation piece? That's the one thing that folks have brought to us. What does that give time for, and what does that education look like?
Yeah, I personally would love to see this implemented immediately. However, because I do think there's a need for education, what I think might work and what I've seen work elsewhere is a warning system the first time, as opposed to educating through other means. I think face-to-face interaction, person-to-person, in a non-judgmental way, but in a very matter-of-fact, this is law now. We're going to warn you. We want to talk to you a little bit about the options that you have, the better options that you have that you may not have been aware of. Intentions may have been good, but what's happening with this life is inappropriate, and it's actually illegal now. So I'm a firm believer in let's make it effective soon, but let's give folks the opportunity to correct their behavior in a non-judgmental way, because as it's been said, a lot of times folks, they may not know any better, or they don't realize the extent of the abuse they're inflicting on that dog. So I prefer an effective immediately, but maybe with a warning the first time, and then with escalated penalties from there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Westerman.
Thank you.
Just want to recognize, I see Judge Connor, who is in the audience, for his service and advocacy as well. Thank you so much for being here. So the second speaker slip that I have is actually from Ms. Morris, and since she's already spoken, I'm going to put that aside and let the record reflect that. Again, thank you all for being here. I look forward to working with Councilmember Stinziano over the next couple weeks as we come back from legislative recess to have this conversation with our team. Do we have another?
It looks like we have a member of the audience who's very interested. If you want to come on up and you can fill the speaker slip out afterwards. No, you're here, and neither was Councilmember Hardin when he ran the first time. Look how he does.
Thank you so much for
Please.
proposing this. My name is Stacy Morris, 6340 Skipping Stone Drive, New Albany, Ohio, and I'm the president of a local nonprofit called Save Ohio Pets. And our population is exactly who this ordinance will go into effect for. So we're a nonprofit here locally that helps the homeless and low-income feed and vet their animals. In fact, we've worked with Director Finney at Columbus Humane several times in working in partnership with some of our homeless clientele as well as some of our low-income clientele. So we do a monthly clinic for low income that come to us, and we get voluntary vets and vet techs to donate their time. We supply the drugs, and we actually vaccinate their animals for free for them. In doing that, we also microchip them. What we've noticed is a lot of the people that are given these fees, such as the fee for the tethering, once their animals are impounded by Franklin County Dog Shelter, they do not go to claim those pets because they can't afford the fees associated with them. It doesn't mean that they're any less of a pet owner than you or I. It's just that they don't have the funds that you and I may have to go and claim their pets. So what we do with this microchipping is we explain the process with them with the microchipping. If it's done right, they're scanned in the field and they're not even taken to the shelter with the impound fee in the first place. So what we've noticed with doing our monthly clinics is we have a lot of clients coming to us with animals not on proper confinement. We have them coming to us on shoestrings, on chains, not thankfully as heavy as you've seen here, but it's a clientele that doesn't understand proper containment like you and I may. So what we've been able to do, thanks to some very generous local sponsors, is we've been able to give out harnesses. We've been able to give out literature. We've been able to speak to these clients already about the tethering in a way that we're already friends with them because we're providing the vet care they need. So what we're seeing with our low-income and homeless demographic is most of our clients, I would say almost all of our clients, are loving pet owners. Their pets sleep in the bed with them. Their pets sleep in the home with them, just like you and I. So a lot of this anti-tethering will affect those that, as Director Finney said, are not necessarily those that are doing the right by their animals in the first place. The dog fighters, especially, we're seeing a lot of our clients come to us rescuing a dog from a neighbor that was being confined in this way. We've had a couple of dogs come to our clinics that were inherited by other family members that maybe went to jail or deceased, and those animals have aggression issues because of the way their families had kept them previously. Every time we speak to our clients are very much in agreement that they want to do the right thing and they don't have the means. We've had many volunteers buying harnesses and leashes and donated items to those goods that we give those out at every clinic, and the next clinic they come and their animal's already walking on the harness or, you know, obviously proud of their pink leash versus the shoestring they had them on the month before. So I'm just very excited that you all proposed this, and I thank you for it. And I know that this is going to impact our city positively, and I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Could you please give the name of the organization? And if I don't know what the capacity is, but folks watch these hearings, so I really, this is a great service that you have. Yeah, I don't know.
We are Save Ohio Pets. We're a local 501c3 nonprofit. And right now our capacity is as much as we get the volunteers.
Okay.
So we're kind of, if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
So our next vet clinic, we have more doctors volunteering than the last one. And so as we go on, we typically handle about 75 pets at our clinic a month for wellness, and then we usually do another 50 to 75 free spay and neuters a month. And then the microchipping and everything else that goes along with it, the aftercare.
Well, thank you so much. I definitely can see you as your organization as being a real partner with this as we start the education piece
Absolutely,
on
we'd
this
love to.
legislation and as we move forward. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm sorry about getting in.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Sure. Just state your name, your address, of who you represent, and we will get your speaker slips filled out after your presentation.
Thank you. What I have to say is very short and simple. We have to speak for these animals. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't say my name. Linda Stickney. My address is 2489 Tremont Road, Upper Arlington, Ohio. I represent the citizens of Ohio, and I'm also on the board of Faithful Forgotten Best Friends, and we work with the homeless and their animals as well. What I wanted to say was we have to be their voice. We have to speak for them because these dogs and these animals cannot speak for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Again, thank you all for being here. Thank you for your advocacy. As each speaker comes up, you can see that this is not a one-off. We all believe and care and love not just for our own animals, but animals in general, and really not animals, but pets, extensions of our families. My Bella sleeps in bed with me as well. Yeah, I don't know. Last night it was not as nothing to clap about. My back is still hurting, but it does speak to really what makes a community vibrant. When we say this is a community that is safe and caring, it extends to our furry family as well. And so I appreciate your advocacy. I appreciate the work that you do each day. Again, I have to admit that some of us are not always, we don't pay attention to the work of the great work that folks are doing to keep our communities great and moving in the right direction. And so I'm using this hearing today to say thank you. With that, I turn the hearing over to Councilmember Stinziano.
Thank you, Councilmember Hardin. Again, thank you for everyone in the audience or those that may be watching from home. Also want to thank your leadership. As you've described, landing the plane can be hard, but this is one that we're very supportive of. In terms of timeline for the public, our next meeting for council will be on September 11th. We'll go back and discuss any potential changes, but it's our intention to move fairly quickly, have it introduced for first read on the 11th, and then continue our legislative process. So timeline looks very positive. That's been some of the questions we've received. I also want to thank Mr. Oswald, I keep getting it wrong, and I apologize, Sandra Martin from the City Attorney's Office, CTV, Columbus Humane Society of the United States, and ASPCA and their members for coming today and presenting, as well as those that were brave enough to come up and present off the cuff. We do appreciate our staff, Stephanie Magus, Linda Capobianco, Zach Davidson, and Kevin McCain for their hard work in making sure Councilmember Hardin and I show up where they want us to be. We both, I think, information presented today was very helpful. The feedback is much appreciated, and really, if there's any additional questions or comments, never hesitate to contact me directly. My city email, mstinziano@columbus.gov, or the office phone number 614-645-8084. Again, thanks everyone for their time here. I think Councilmember Hardin has the gavel, so you can close it out, or with that, this hearing is closed. Thanks everyone.